But isn't it telling how in the face of war, in the face of a world crisis, the sheep are sorted out from the goats? Like, look at the White House. A complete joke. You've got a president who assured Vladimir Putin last December that the US would not take Russia on militarily if it invaded Ukraine, which put and gave Putin the front row seat, the perfect green light for war in the Ukraine. Well done, Joe. And when Biden's not confusing the Ukrainians with the Iranians, his special envoy John Kerry is warning Putin to keep to his climate targets while he fights the war. What a farce. They must operate in some kind of parallel universe, those two. On the other side of the ledger, though, you've got the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who's the everywhere man at the moment, doing all the heavy lifting, even trying to get jets into Ukraine somehow from Poland. Hasn't done it yet. And to his credit, you've got Australia's Scott Morrison keeping his eye on the next big challenge, which is China's ambitions to invade Taiwan. His address yesterday, I thought, was timely and it was spot on. And thankfully, the West now has Boris Johnson standing up front, who, despite being under pressure, of course, to resign over those drinky poos during COVID, he's absorbing the barbs and remains one of the only adults left in the war room. Seriously, this morning, he rightly pinpointed how to bury Russia and stop the bloodshed. He's pragmatic, Boris, for all his colour. He is pragmatic. He wants the climate zealots to step aside. He wants to increase oil and gas production significantly so Europe can sever its reliance on Russian oil and gas, which is their key revenue raiser. Now, we held a press conference early today to highlight the simple fact that net zero targets sound great, but the world still needs fossil fuels now to defend itself.
Of using more of our own hydrocarbons, and you'll have heard already what the business secretary has had to say about licenses for UK's own domestic production. That doesn't mean that we are in any way abandoning our commitment to reducing CO2. You can do that, but we've got to reflect the reality that there is a crunch on at the moment. We need to intensify our self-reliance as a transition with more hydrocarbons. But what we also need to do is go for more nuclear and much more use of renewable energy.
Hear what he said? Reality. The reality has to sink in. We've been badgered for 20 years about weaning off oil and gas for energy. Australia has virtually been extorted by big business to adopt net zero by 2050. And as Europe takes the renewable route, what happens? They just become more reliant on Russia for baseload power to keep the lights on. So almost half of Europe's entire energy supplies come from Russia. These are the facts. And Boris is calling a pause on what is an inconvenient truth.
We have to consider how we can all move away as fast as possible from dependence, reliance on Russian hydrocarbons, Russian oil and gas. And everybody's doing that. Everybody's on the same journey. Some countries will find it faster and easier than others. That's all. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it together.
Now, does all this sound vaguely familiar? Does it sound like someone else warned us about this years ago? Remember when that unhinged US president said the same thing over and over again and he was smashed for it? Not only did he demand that America and the West become energy independent, but he wanted the US to be energy dominant.
6 brand new initiatives to propel this new era of American energy dominance. First, we will begin to revive and expand our nuclear energy sector. Second, the Department of the Treasury will address barriers to the financing of highly efficient overseas coal energy plants. Third, my administration has just approved the construction of a new petroleum pipeline to Mexico, which will further boost American energy exports.
Unhinged, they said. Wise and prophetic, definitely, especially now. Right now, if NATO nations severed their ties to Russian oil and gas, it would cripple Moscow almost immediately. But countries such as Italy, Germany, the Netherlands and Finland would only exist in the dark. The lights would go off. And so what Boris Johnson wants is for one all-out effort, especially from Canada and the US, to ramp up oil and gas production, including various infrastructure requirements to freeze out Russia entirely. Back to the future. But that's a hell of a lot of catching up to do. So will the Green Warriors step aside? Will Europe's renewable zealots drop their lifelong campaigns for the sake of weakening the world's #1 enemy? They must. But what's the pushback from here? You'll see a lot of it tomorrow when this starts to sink in. Green politicians aren't good at compromise. Their absolutism, it's world-renowned. But for the survival of Ukraine and the fight against this autocratic monster, Vladimir Putin, they must concede. They must yield. Boris Johnson is quickly emerging as the only real leader of the free world and the only leader capable of defeating Vladimir Putin. With any luck, it'll also lead to a reset in our global energy complacency.